What's good, Photoshop fam? Today, in my all black everything, I'm gonna teach you how to change color in Photoshop in anything. Stick around. What's up, Photoshop fam? I'm Rick Navarro, and this is the Pixel Laundry Photoshop Academy. Okay, so one of the most important tools in Photoshop is your selections, right? You use selections for pretty much everything. But there are several ways to make selections. There are several tools that you can use to make selections, but then there are also several methods that you can use to make selections. And today we're going to be talking about a really popular one. Color. Color is a pretty tricky thing because it's very subjective, right? The human eye sees color differently from person to person. We see color differently from monitor to monitor. Your profile setup could be different than mine. Your printer setup may be different than mine. Today I'm going to show you a couple ways to use the HueSat adjustment layer. If you're not familiar with adjustment layers, they basically work in layers. Surprise, surprise. Your effect will only apply to the layer, but not to the image itself. The adjustment layer is a separate layer that is directly above your image. So it's another technique on working non-destructively, which I talk a lot about in a lot of my videos. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so I have this image that I worked on some time ago, and I thought it'd be a perfect candidate for this because it is a color block campaign image that will demonstrate these ideas very clearly. So what we want to do here is make a selection based off of the colors. And the way we're going to do that is by using the color range selection tool. If you go under select color range, it's going to bring up this palette. Now in here, you've got this little drop down that will have presets kind of set up for you. So if you're trying to grab one of the colors that are in here and you wanted just a generic way to select them all, you could come in here and grab all of the reds, all of the yellows, greens, so on and so forth. Okay. My favorite way to do this is to use this eyedropper tool right here. And let's just take a look at these a couple of these options. This is going to show you the selection based off of a mask. If you're not familiar with masks, masks work like masks, like you're covering and you're concealing and revealing, okay? Right? Black conceals, white reveals, and that's how you can tell what's being selected. Right now I've got it selected on selection based as opposed to the image, so I can actually see. Then I've also got a couple of these little drop downs here that will give me different viewing versions of what I'm looking at. I could look at it in all black, I could look at it in a white mask, or I could look at it in a quick mask. My preference is grayscale, so I can actually see some of the gradients and what's actually being selected. Because remember now, this is going to select a bit of a range, not just the only, like the reds only or the blues only. It kind of gives you red, and then as it fades out into those other colors in the color wheel, it will also give you gradients of that color. And I'll show you how to adjust that as well. Now, let's just say we wanted to adjust just these blues up at the top, right? So I'm gonna make a selection based off of that. Color range, again, I'm gonna go sample colors, and if I click in here, all of the white color that you can see here is what is going to be selected. Now, this is her leg, and her leg kind of cuts off here, and you'll notice that there's a shadow here, okay? I can add the blue in the shadow if I click on the add eyedropper tool. So if I click here, now it's going to select a wider range of colors that are truer to that blue, okay? Now, what you'll notice happen here is that it also grabbed some of the blues that are on her skin, on her shirt, on her hair. And while you can eliminate that, I don't want you to do that just yet, and I'll show you why in a second. Okay, so based off of this selection, now I can go Image, Adjustments, and HueSat. That's where it is in the menu set, but I like this one better. It's a little bit faster because I'm going to be working with it in my layers palette anyways. So I just go right over to my layers palette and HueSat. Two different ways to do the same thing, okay? And based off of that selection, it's created a mask for me. Now, if I hold down Alt or Option and click on this, it will give me an actual mask of everything that is selected, okay? So you can see that even though we clicked over here, there were blue tonal ranges somewhere inside of those shadows and some of those other blues that we added to the selection, we made it whiter. Now, if I go back to my actual HueSat layer and I go over here to my hue slider, now I can just easily switch and trade out that color for any other color. And if you'll notice that because we grabbed the shadow colors, it's also affecting the color of the shadows. And another thing I want you to notice is that because we grabbed so much of these other colors in here, that they're starting to turn white and kind of gradating into the white, that hue layer is affecting those areas as well. Now that's a good thing, because if I paint that off for some reason, or if I got rid of it and I just wanted a super tight selection just around the model, let's say we wanted it a color that was kind of, you know, far a stretch from where we started. This is kind of close, but let's say we go like to something like that. And I had gotten rid of all of the color in her skirt. Now I've got a new problem I got to figure out. Why do I have blue reflections in a purple wall? So leaving that bounce light or that bounce color is really good to help sell your image when you want, you know, maybe bring two worlds together into one cohesive unit. Visually, it's going to sell it a lot better. Look, as I just get rid of it and get those purple highlights back, that's actually working really, really well. So you can see color range is pretty stinking awesome. I wanted to show you another example like of a complex selection where color range really stands out and really shines. This is a project I did some time ago where I had to basically insert a background or a sky into this particular image. The problem is that look at all of these selections. If I go in here even with a pen tool, or if I go with a wand, or I go with, you know, any of maybe, you know, a lasso tool, maybe any of my other normal selection tools or processes, I'm going to be here forever. Okay. But if I use color range and utilize the example I just showed you, I can grab all of these white areas that quick. One thing I didn't mention in the other example was this fuzziness slider, okay? Now, if I dial down this slider, I can control the level of gradation that it's allowing Photoshop to select from. So in this particular instance, I don't want anything in the foreground or as much as I can eliminate as possible to make my life easier. I just want all that white background because that's where I want to plug in a sky. So in that case, look how quickly this has made light work of all of these individual tiny little pieces in these selections. It's great. Now what I can do is grab my sky and insert that easily with a mask. In this particular case, I wanted to show you this one because there's actually a shortcut. So I just showed you color range and how color range can quickly make light work of selections. But whenever you're making color adjustments in Photoshop, it's very color centric. So if I have an object that is primarily one color, like in that previous example, it was the floor. In this particular example, it's the bag, but I've got these little metal components that I may need to mask out. How do I move in a way that's going to allow me to make a selection very quickly without having to manually go in here and make all these selections? Well, the cool thing about the HueSat layer is that it is also color centric. So if I know that this color right here is so different from this color right here, I don't even have to make the selection. I can come in here and add a HueSat layer, and with this little icon right here, if I click on that, it's going to bring up an eyedropper tool, but it's going to now narrow my selection based off of the color. So if you see when I clicked here, this turned to cyan. Whereas if I just add a regular HueSat layer, it starts out as at a default place where it's changing anything and everything. But what if I just want to isolate that to the cyan channel? I can, if you click under here, under master, you'll see I've got different channel options here. I can affect just the reds, the yellows, the greens, the cyans, the blues, the magentas, right? But then if I click in there, what you'll notice is that this little slider comes up and it's also sliding to one side or to the other side of that color wheel. I can tighten those channels down in order to tell Photoshop that I only want you to select from this color range, or I want to open it very, very wide so that when I select, it's going to select a broad color range. So let's just say I want blues, but I want it to kind of lean into the purples, but maybe not so far as the reds, right? I can open up this channel slider here on the end and say, pick anything that's within this entire color range. Or in the same way, in the opposite, I can tighten this channel down to pick only a very narrow window of colors. So if I do that, now I can make my adjustments and notice that the color on the metal tags is not changing. Now I can change this to anything I want. Pretty rad, right? Now what about if the colors are close side by side? Now this is what I was saying. You can use the color range tool to give you an exact selection, but let's just say I'm trying to move loose and fast and I need to make a color correction just on this yellow. I'm just going to make a rough selection around the yellow. I'm going to grab a hue sat layer and grab my selection, and right here, this is such a great example. Right in the middle is where I selected, but because I've selected a color that's close to the color that I'm trying to change, and the background happens to be orange, which is close to yellow, it's going to affect everything. So if I go in here and I move everything, you'll see that it's affecting everything, right? But if I grab this and slide it down, it's narrowed my color selection down to affect only the things that are purest to the pixel that I selected. And as you can see, that works pretty stinking awesome. And again, my mask isn't super tight right now. I'm looking for efficiency, and that works really great. I'm just going around all on the same mask, and I'm creating color adjustments based off of that. If you wanted to, what you can do is what I've done here is do these independently of each other. Now I've got full range, but be careful, because if you go into an area like that, where the color range is similar to the background, then you have the same issue. And the way you fix that is just go back to the areas that you adjusted, or narrow down your selection. There it is again. That's how you fix it. Another thing I forgot to mention is that the color range tool is actually really, really excellent for skin, because there's small gradations that happen in skin, especially in skin that's discolored. So if you have a model that has one type of skin tone, or may have skin issues, or maybe the lighting is weird, maybe there's a weird color cast, you can use exactly what I just showed you with the hue sat, and you can narrow down the selection of miscolors or color casts that are happening in the skin, and you can make adjustments to just those areas. I've got a video I just did on how to color correct skin. You should check that out. I'll put that up in the link right here. One thing I see that the gurus do not show you on the Photoshop channels on how to change color is how to change blacks or whites to a color. So color range is great for selection. All your normal tools for selection are great. Your hue sat layer is phenomenal. But what if the image that you start with has no color information? For example, it's white or it's black. How do you add color to that? Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So this is an example I have here of a black bag. And let's say I wanted to change the color of this bag. In fact, let's say I'm going to change the color and add a pattern. How do I do that? So first thing you would do is make your selections. I've already gone ahead and done that for the sake of time. Okay, I'm actually only going to mess with this main section of the bag just for the sake of the example. So let's take a look. If we add a hue sat layer here, what happens? I've already got my selection, my mask has been created, and if I go and try to manipulate or change the color, because there's no color there aside from maybe color that's in the room, nothing happens. So what do, right? Well, there is an option down here called Colorize, and I like this option in this particular case, or cases that are similar to this, to introduce color into an object that may not have color inherently. So if I click on that, okay, well that's better, right? It gives me kind of almost like a pearly finish, but a lot of that black is still showing through. So if I want to punch that color, I can kick it up, and I can even bring the lightness in. But look what's happening to the bag. If you pull out, right? Actually, let's just take it off. You pull out, the bag went flat. This has a tendency to neutralize your mid-tones, okay? So your grays, basically. It's not going to give you a very strong highlight. It's not going to give you a very strong low light. It's going to kind of flatten everything and neutralize all the colors to a neutral place. Now, this could be passable in some circumstances, but what if you wanted to take this to the next level? How do you do it? And this is a pro tip, by the way. This is a little bit more advanced, but this is also what you're not getting elsewhere and what you're going to get here on the Pixel Lingerie Photoshop Academy. Okay, this is your pro tip alert. Pro tip alert. Pro tip flying across the screen. All right, check this out. So basically, based off of this selection, what I want to do is make a selection of the original image. If I go down here, hit Command or Control J, it's going to duplicate the selection that I've created. I'm going to put that selection over top. And what I want to do is convert this into a grayscale image. So even if this was color, if for some reason I'm using the HueSat adjustment layer and I hit colorize and it flattens out my colors and it doesn't make it look just right. You know, I've seen this where I've changed the color of tops and for some reason, maybe it's like a baby color and there's not enough saturation for me to use the existing color to shift it over to a color that the client might be requesting. I will use this technique, right? I'll introduce color, I'll flatten the color on purpose now, but I'll go back to the original layer, duplicate that layer, and then I'm going to convert that to black and white. Remember, Photoshop really loves masks, really loves things that work in the channels. So grayscale, black and white, it really adapts and works well with that. Okay, so once I have my selection made, I'm going to use that selection and duplicate the original background. If I bring that up, it's going to cover my color adjustment. I'm going to desaturate that. You can't see it because it turned black, but it's desaturated. And then I'm going to drop this down to either overlight or soft light. For this one, I think it's going to be soft light. So from right there alone, just in 3 layers, from here to here, you can see that the difference between this red and this red is that there's much more detail inside of the contrast, okay? A lot of those contrasty details are important for the lowlights and the midtones in order for a bag or an object to look dimensional, okay? That could be true for like a shirt or a product like this. You can use this technique in a lot of different ways. I used it one time to convert an entire vehicle from white to black. And again, color adjustments, I challenge you, look all over YouTube, see if you can find or how many videos you can find that show you how to convert something from black or white to a color. There's a few techniques, but they're few and far in between. They're hard to find. And it's because of this. It's because a lot of times it requires a lot more steps to introduce color, then manipulate it, than it does to take existing color and then slide it over to a different color. It's way easier to do that than it is to introduce color, but this is how you do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command L or Option L for levels, and I want to adjust what's happening just on that particular layer now. Remember, this layer looks like this, but because it's on a blend mode, it's interacting with the rest of the image differently. But if I grab a levels layer and I adjust my levels, now I can crank up those whites and drop some of them out and maybe enrich some of those dark tones so that the bag actually looks like a 3-dimensional object, which is really what I'm going for. You see the difference? See, now we're getting all the detail here and these highlights and all these multiple surfaces. Your stitching especially, look at the stitching. Now what if I wanted to introduce a pattern into this as well? Well, basically I can grab a pattern, which I've already done, and I can slide it in over top of that. Well, how do you do that? All right, well, let me show you. Okay, so again, I've got existing masks. So I'm going to use this mask, and I've already got a pattern layer here. This is what the pattern looks like without any blending mode on it. I'm going to lay it over top, and I'm going to grab that pattern, and I'm going to apply a mask to it. So from here, this may vary depending on the image that you put on here, but you want to play with these blending modes to see which one works the best for you. In my particular case, I liked linear burn just to kind of introduce that pattern into here. And you can see it's already starting to make itself work. The problem is that you've got this flat pattern on top of an object that was probably sewn in pieces and in sections. And in real life, nobody's matching up these pattern crossovers where it's crossing over the seams exactly. So a quick way to do that is to break up your masks into sections. I'm going to do it in a couple different sections here just so you can see it and how it works. But basically, you would want to break this up into as many sections as are visible. What I did was, instead of utilizing this whole mask, I'm just going to use half of it. And I've already created it because it looks like the seam stops right here where these two front pockets are. This is more than likely one piece of material, but this one up here is definitely a different one. So then what I did is I applied that mask to just half. And if we look at my mask here, I deleted everything else. So from there on the bottom down, I got rid of the rest of the mask. Now, for the second section though, I brought back the bottom half of the mask like this. Now, I didn't go as far as to take out the zipper. That would be the next step, but I just want you to see this so you can see what I'm talking about, okay? So I've gotten rid of the top in this particular one, and on the second section, I've gotten rid of the bottom. So basically, with both layers, I've got the whole product, but individually, I've got one on top and one on the bottom. Next to your mask, there's a little link here, and what that does is it links the image to your mask. If I unselect that, now I've got free reign. Actually, and if I unselect it and I actually select the pattern, you can see these little white corners that tells you which is selected. If I grab the actual pattern, now I can grab it and move, deselect it, and then I can move the mask independently. Excuse me, I can move the file independently of the mask. And that helps sell the effect that this is an actual product as opposed to something that's been created in Photoshop. Same thing down here, right? If I leave it linked and grab this layer, the entire thing is going to move. I don't want that. Unlink it, make sure that you're selected on the pattern itself, and you'll be able to move this around. Now, if you wanted to take it a step further, now you can apply a normal HueSat layer to this, because now I've introduced color into the black bag, and then it works just like it normally would anywhere else. Grab that HueSat, come over here, make my adjustments, change it to whatever color I want it to be. And that's how you do color on an object or a product or an image that has no color already in it. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope that helps. I hope that brought some value to you. If that helped you out, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. If you've got an idea for a show, comment down below. Until next time, keep it real. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. What's going on, Photoshop today? Stupid.